All right, so I am Colin Charles, and I work at Percona. But before this, for 7 years, I was on the founding team of MariaDB Server. So right up until last August, I actually worked on the server for 7 years. So I do know a thing or two about the server and its history. Before that, I was at MySQL. So as I like to joke, I spent more or less maybe 14 or 15 years working on the same thing at different companies. I've also won an award, and if you go to tomorrow's keynote, you'll see other people winning awards as well. So what is MariaDB Server? So there are two of you here that use it, one that uses it more than the other. Taking this straight out the website, and I'd like to bring attention to the fact that it's used because it is an enhanced drop-in replacement. It's used because it's fast, scalable, robust, with a rich ecosystem of storage engines, plugins, and many other tools to help you. But what is it really? MariaDB's initial goals were to be community developed, feature enhanced, and backward compatible to MySQL. Those goals have obviously changed as MariaDB became a fork of MySQL 5.5. So MariaDB 10.0 is based on the 5.5 branch, but has additional features. 10.1 is similar. It's based on 10.0, which is also the 5.5 branch. And of course, 10.2 is based on 10.1 and so on. MySQL has gone obviously a different path. 5.6 has become fairly refactored compared to 5.5, and 5.7 has further refactorings compared to 5.6. In fact, 8.0 even, today if you were at the keynote, you'll realize there's even more refactoring around the data dictionary and so forth. So there's lots of changes that MySQL is having that MariaDB will not get, but MariaDB will implement in a different fashion. So for all intents and purposes, since this is a 10.2 talk and we're giving this in 2017, MariaDB is actually a fork of MySQL 5.5 with added features. It has different features. Obviously, I would say it's generally application compatible with MySQL, and of course the aim is to have full feature compatibility with MySQL, but that is not necessarily true because not all features can be implemented immediately. So there is actually a compatibility page that lists the more important things that are not compatible, but for all intents and purposes, that is the aim. And something that is not compatible will obviously be, there will be a JIRA filed for it as well. And from an upgrade standpoint, I would say it's definitely a drop-in replacement because you can attach a slave, a MariaDB slave to MySQL, or you can just MySQL upgrade it and it should be no problem to you. But if you would like to go from MariaDB to MySQL 5.6 or 5.7, that would pose a problem for you. You'd have to dump the data and restore it. And in certain cases, if you use things like dynamic columns, you'd have to munch the data further. Of course, communities are completely key for MariaDB, so everything is on GitHub. You can submit code. Anybody here want submit code to open source projects before? No? Yes? So you can submit code either as the BSD license, or you can submit it via signing a contributor license agreement. MariaDB is now not exactly that young any longer. It's 7 years old. February 1st, 2017 was its 7th birthday from a GA release. And the current CEO of MariaDB Corporation mentioned 2 weeks ago that there are approximately 150,000 downloads of MariaDB every month from the website. And the general marketing claim is that there are 12 million users of MariaDB out there because, of Linux distributions and so forth. And MariaDB.org, the foundation, also said that in 2016, there was a 70% increase in website traffic. So they got about 1.9 million page views in 2016, up from 1.1 million page views in 2015. So there is growth. So MariaDB through the years, I was hoping that I would say 10.2 is GA, but the reality is it is still a release candidate at this very moment. 10.1 is the current stable GA. Does anybody here use 10.1? You use Cluster, okay. Okay. Yeah. So hopefully will migrate soon because 10.1 includes Galera Cluster as well. And so 10.2 is still a release candidate. There are over 200 releases of the server and the connectors. And everything I've listed here is exactly what the MariaDB Foundation releases. So it begs to wonder why there are two instances of MariaDB. So there is a corporation, so they release other products like MariaDB MaxScale, which is open in source, but not actually open for use. It's got a business source license tacked onto it. And then there's also MariaDB Column Store, which is, at least one gentleman here is using. And that is actually InfiniDB tacked on to MariaDB 10.1. It is not a proper storage engine. It is just tack on, and it has many differences. And we'll talk about that even when we go further down to like window functions. But of course, that's not the focus of this talk, because we're just going to focus on the server. And then of course, the foundation exists to make releases of MariaDB server, ensure there's open collaboration, and so forth. So I want to just talk to you about the new things that MariaDB introduced over time. And for one, and things that will probably still affect you till today. For one, MariaDB's temporary table storage engine is not MyISAM, neither is it InnoDB. It is ARIA. ARIA is a crash-safe MyISAM. It's not transactional like InnoDB, but it is crash-safe. What this means to you as a user is that you do need to configure ARIA page cache size in your my.cnf. Otherwise, you will actually have poor performance. MariaDB 5.1 also introduced a thread pool. So 7 years ago, there was actually a thread pool, first ever thread pool in the MySQL world, so to speak. Table elimination still exists and is unique to MariaDB in the sense that if you have thought of anchor modeling, or you come from a SQL Server world and know a little bit more about anchor modeling, it allows you to derive queries when you have highly normalized data without touching each and every table that the query refers to. And even till today, there is microsecond precision in the process list. So if you look for time_ms, this is actually a unique MariaDBism. So if you run this exact command in MariaDB, you will actually be able to get something that you don't see in regular MySQL. MariaDB Server 5.2 was actually released in 2011 as well, in the fall of 2011, and it created virtual columns. And this is what you call in 5.7 generated columns. And generated columns, of course, can simulate functional indexes, right? So you use it to store columns to define a functional expression and index it. So it can be very useful for you to, work with columns of types that can't be indexed directly. So typically, a JSON column would find use for this. Of course, the disadvantage of such an approach is that the data is stored twice, once for the value of the generated column and once for the index. Now, the 5.2 version doesn't support all that extensions. Those extensions come in 10.2, so that's why it's also relevant. Pluggable authentication also appeared in 5.2, which allows you to replace the native password authentication with something like PAM or Kerberos, Active Directory, and so forth. And user statistics. If you want a low overhead performance schema and you want to see index table statistics, you could actually turn on user stats, which is contributed by the kind folk at Google and Facebook, as opposed to being created by database developers. It's actually created by database users at scale. So MariaDB Server 5.3 was released in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of the focus was on the optimizer. So again, I'm not going to delve deep into the optimizer because that takes its own 3 hours. There were also many replication improvements that are only present in newer MySQL, which is why I'm not going to call them out. But things like group commit in the binary log first appeared in MariaDB 5.3. Handler socket is a way for you to bypass the entire SQL layer and go directly to the InnoDB storage engine. So it's good for simple create, read, update, delete operations. So it uses InnoDB like a key value store. And the handler socket has been included in Percona server up to 5.6, was removed in 5.7 because it is more or less deprecated upstream, but it is still part of MariaDB server if you happen to want to use handler socket. And then dynamic columns appeared in 5.3 as well. Dynamic columns was the idea that you could have a unique column for each and every row in your database. And this unique column could be up to 1 gigabyte in size, which is max packet size. And you could think of it as a blob with handling functions built in. So you could actually query data in said blob and so forth. So kind of handy, but maybe not utilized fully outside of examples. MariaDB Server 5.5 also brought some unique features like limit rows examined. So this one actually goes and hits the optimizer. So when you execute a query, it doesn't actually have to go and say query 1,000 rows. It'll just query. It'll do a summary of the rows and tell you that you've got a partial result set if you limited the rows to say 10. So the optimizer got smarter and it can derive answers better for you. Non-blocking client API. This is for you to run maybe show status on multiple CPUs, so multiple servers, and it'll work in a asynchronous fashion. And a non-blocking client library is something that you also see utilized in WebScaleSQL. Has anybody heard of WebScaleSQL before? Okay, so WebScaleSQL also does have a non-blocking client API that is different, but the idea is obviously the same. The important thing here, of course, is the base had changed to MySQL 5.5. So it had migrated from the 5.1 base to the 5.5 base, and this is actually where there was a hard stop in actually merging things. Now everything is cherry-picked going forward. So any new feature is cherry-picked. So this also means that every point release of MySQL comes with a myriad of bug fixes, which also means those myriad of bug fixes need to be cherry-picked because they don't all apply to a new MariaDB, or they may be missed. So again, you'll have to make use of Jira a lot. So MariaDB Server 10.0, based on, of course, built on top of MariaDB 5.5, lots of cool replication stuff. Parallel replication, which I won't delve into because, again, there's a session here in this room right after this about that. Global transaction IDs. So global transaction IDs are actually conceptually different from how global transaction IDs in MySQL 5.6 are executed. One of the reasons why was because MariaDB's implementation allows it to be turned on without restarting your topology. 5.7 was the first to introduce that, and Percona Server 5.6 is what is known as the GTID step mode. But regular MySQL 5.6 required a topology restart. Also, multi-source replication was required to be supported in global transaction IDs, and MariaDB had multi-source replication before MySQL 5.7 had multi-source replication. Well worth noting, many storage engines. So the Murunga storage engine for CJK languages, if you were interested in doing full text search with Chinese, Japanese, or Korean, Murunga is super fast for that. TokuDB, another engine, which is Percona TokuDB, allows you to basically focus on fast insert speeds, great compression. Spider storage engine allows for sharding via SQL with multiple InnoDB backends. The Connect storage engine, which we'll have slides for, which allows connections to other ODBC data sources and so forth. And the Cassandra storage engine, which allow a Cassandra backend. Now, I have to give you a caveat that the Cassandra storage engine has been deprecated in 10.1. So if you still needed to access an older version of Cassandra, 10.0 is your last one to use it. Show explain for thread ID, which is similar to what you get in MySQL 5.7 explain for connection ID. And the output for that also thrown into a slow query log available in 10.0. SQL standard roles came out in MariaDB 10.0 as well. This is something that there was a talk about earlier today morning at the keynote, that you will get access to SQL standard roles inside of MySQL 8, but it is still a developer milestone release. And regular expressions. Instead of using the regular expression library that MySQL has had for the longest time, it has been replaced by Perl-compatible regular expressions, which is much more powerful and introduces a few more SQL statements. Now, today, at 4:30 to 4:55, again in this room, there is an excellent Spider talk by the person who wrote Spider. So if you are going to be interested in talking about Spider and sharding, I highly recommend you to go there. And you're going to realize that there's a theme here. If you just park yourselves here all day, this is sort of the MariaDB track, so to speak. So you will hear lots of MariaDB today and tomorrow. So why MariaDB? Largely because I think people like to see vendor independence, and freedom from vendor lock-in is extremely important. MariaDB also, I think, helps in ensuring that the MySQL ecosystem development is at its most vibrant today. The community of people who develop code, so lots of people who actually push code, come from the community, not from MariaDB Corporation. So that is useful. You can get feature shipping inside a server. Of course, storage engine vendors don't really have much opportunity to get shipped, and that is something you totally get inside here. Roadmaps, of course, public on Jira. So jira.mariadb.org has public roadmaps, though not necessarily the release dates. They're pretty good, more or less, for every release, except maybe the next GA release is not there. Where do you get MariaDB? You can go to mariadb.org and get it, of course. You can also get it from a Linux distribution of your choice. It is the default in RHEL 7, SUSE Enterprise 12. So RHEL 7 ships MariaDB 5.5, SUSE Enterprise 12, and OpenSUSE ship MariaDB 10.0. CentOS follows RHEL. Fedora ships a more recent release. It is actually 10.1. OpenBSD as well. Next version of Debian and Ubuntu will ship it as a default. You can get it in many clouds, as was talked about today morning in the keynote. So Rackspace, Azure, and so forth. And of course, AWS. In fact, there is a talk from AWS about RDS and MariaDB and MySQL also later today in another room, but it'll probably clash with the Spider talk. 10.1 was a community release, and I put this up here mainly because I'd like to show you how long it takes to make a release, right? You start a release in 2014, and it only reaches GA probably about a year and a half later. But once it does reach GA, though, you actually tend to get a release cadence of about once per month on average. And that seems to be pretty fair release cycle in terms of having bug fixes and so forth. In terms of 10.2, you'll also realize that it has taken some time. The first alpha actually popped out around this time last April, and it is expected that it will also take another 1.5 years of work, and the expected GA stable release is probably before summer of 2017. And if I thought it might also be this Friday, but that information is still not quite public. It's also worth noting that you can compare this to 10.1. It had 3 alphas and 4 betas and 1 release candidate. And in this case, it's all been 2.2.2. So you can probably guess when the GA will probably pop by. 10.2 has a bunch of themes as well. And we'll also talk about 10.1 since that is the current GA. But we'll start with 10.2 first. Analytical queries, optimizer improvements, some improvements in the client protocol, also removing old limitations, some refactoring, not quite the refactoring you'll see in say MySQL 8, but definitely refactoring, replication, and a bunch of new engines. Well, yes, actually InnoDB is a new engine. So when it comes to analytical queries, it's worth noting that of course you have access to things like common table expressions as well as recursive CTEs. So if you went to today morning's keynote as well from Thomas Ulin, he gave you an example of a recursive CTE that will actually work similarly in MariaDB. There's also window functions. And for the column store user here, there is actually at the moment, the syntax follows the SQL standard, but column store has actually a little bit more in terms of window function capability at the moment. The implementation at the moment is different, and it'll be different to MySQL 8 as well. So the idea is, of course, the performance should be no worse, and if it is, you should, of course, file a bug, but your results should obviously be the same. And of course, as we all know, window functions take window of records to aggregate data and smooth things out more or less. And CTEs also can be used for analytics purposes. Good news is there is actually another 15 minutes dedicated to all of this by Vicentiu Ciabaru, who actually works at the MariaDB Foundation. So I highly recommend going to his talk, because if you're interested in window functions, this is a good one to go to. Client protocol as well. The connector C for MySQL and MariaDB Server is now libMySQL API, libMySQL client API compatible. It's also LGPL, but it does not link against YASL or Wolf SSL any longer. And it actually links against regular Open SSL, and on Windows it links against S-channel. The execute immediate statement is very Oracle-like. This basically immediately executes a dynamic SQL statement that is created on the fly, which is supposed to basically reduce performance overhead. It supports complex expressions. Of course, you can also do it like with select one if you like, but and it'll convert it to like a prepared statement with parameters. Only limitations are that subselects and stored function calls don't work as a prepared source. But this is a Oracleism, so to speak. Many historical limitations have been removed. So check constraint was more or less not working because it'll be accepted but ignored, but now it does work, and you can specify it per column or per table. The default clause, of course, can also be arbitrary. Blob and text also has a default value available now. Generated columns. So we talked about generated columns earlier from 5.2, and a lot of the stuff that was missing in generated columns is now available. So you can index them, so not just index persistent columns. You can have up to 64 kilobytes per expression. This was limited previously to 252 bytes. You can have constant expressions referring to virtual columns. It works with non-deterministic functions as well, so that could be against UDFs, the user-defined functions, or even server variables. So yeah, quite useful. And decimal has also increased from 30 to 38, and this, I guess, goes also in line to it looking more like Oracle. Many changes to replication. So MySQL 5.7 has changed the default replication bin log format to row-based replication. MariaDB 10.2 has changed it to mixed mode replication. What is mixed mode? Mixed mode is statement by default unless you have dangerous statements like UDFs or accessing server variables, then it switches to row-based. Also, maybe quite controversially, replicate annotate row events has been turned on by default. That means even when you do get row-based replication, you get the annotation of the actual statement on the top, because you can't debug row-based replication because you don't read the bin log yourself, right? But you do read statements. So this has been turned on by default, and I'm not sure what the performance hit on this might be, but it might be worth looking at. There's also binary log event compression, but this is actually not necessarily a new thing. It's present in MySQL 5.7 as well. Time delayed replication was available in MySQL 5.6. It is also now available in MariaDB 10.2. Limiting the binary log speed that the slave reads from the master is a useful feature contributed by Alibaba. Continuous binary log backup using MySQL binlog, also not a new feature. It's more or less a 5.6 compatibility. Now, if you're wondering why I might have skipped DML-only flashback, it allows you to actually go back in time. You can roll back instances, databases, tables. This is actually really cool, and it works alongside MySQL binlog. And the reason why I don't talk much about it is because if you can go back in time to yesterday, you can actually see a wonderful talk by Ligjun Pen, who actually wrote the feature and contributed it from Alibaba. And his slides are already on the internet, so you can actually take a good look-see as to how the design and the implementation went into it, as well as how you'd use it as a DBA. JSON functionality is also now available inside of MariaDB 10.2, of course, with GeoJSON. It follows the SQL standard. It's got MySQL compatible extensions, but there is no JSON data type. Now, I was told that there are benchmarks which suggest that the Vacha is just as fast as JSON data type, but we expect to see this published soon at some stage. Basically, you can have a field for JSON data, virtual columns. You can index JSON key, constraint to validate the JSON format. You can insert it as a string. There are over, I think, 24 JSON functions available. And from a GeoJSON standpoint as well, you can convert geometric data types to a GeoJSON element. And this is more or less kind of equivalent to what you see inside of MySQL 5, 7, and 8. So there is no, but it does not make use of boost geometry. This is its own geo libraries. This, I think, is a major change, well worth noting, because for the first time in MariaDB's history, InnoDB will be the default InnoDB. Previously, the default InnoDBs were always Percona XtraDB. InnoDB is now taken from MySQL 5.7, so this also means you have access to, spatial indexes. It also means that if you go to Dmitry Kravchuk's talk, where he will probably benchmark MySQL against MariaDB, and he comes from Oracle, and of course the benchmarks from MariaDB will look really bad. It is well worth noting that if you now benchmark against a modern InnoDB, you may get better performance. So well worth noting and pointing that out as well. Of course, a few changes to InnoDB. There's actually no one InnoDB talk here about what is coming in basically 10.2, and I think a lot of the InnoDB changes are kind of fluid, which you'll also see in 10.3. MyRocks, I think, is a huge deal. There is even a RocksDB track at this conference, so if you're interested in RocksDB or MyRocks, this integration is a huge deal. So you can now not only use InnoDB or TalkDB, you can also use MyRocks, and MyRocks is great again for compression, and it's great again for reducing write amplification. And the good news is there is another 50-minute talk dedicated just to the engine tomorrow by Sergey Petrunia, who actually did the integration of MyRocks into MariaDB Server. So if you're interested, I highly recommend going to this talk as well. Something that I like, and I think web hosting companies also will like, is you can limit resource usage, with max n per hour, where you can limit the number of queries, updates, or connections that a user can make or place per hour. This is quite useful, I would say. A lot of interesting new features have also actually come out via the MariaDB Foundation's participation in Google Summer of Code. So things like roles, Kerberos authentication, and so forth. And I think it's well worth saying, thank you to Google, because they help make Google and students, because they help make MariaDB better. 10.1 is still the current GA, as I said, so it's not 10.2 yet, but all the features that we'll talk about in 10.1 will also be in 10.2, obviously. Anybody here use MariaDB 10.1 yet? Okay. So we'll talk about a little bit about security. First, there is encryption. Now, you were at today morning's keynote, and you heard Thomas Ulin mention that encryption has improved in 8.0 because they're not only encrypting the table space, they're also encrypting the logs. But keep in mind that MariaDB, since 10.1, has been able to encrypt logs as well as tables or table spaces. There are also key management plugins, though these that keep on the file system are probably not advisable for you to use, because you can walk away with the key as well. The overhead is actually very low. It works for only XtraDB and InnoDB. You do need to create keys, so this is, if you're going to use file key management, this would be an example of how you do that. Also, example of how you'd encrypt just a table. This would be table space encryption at its best, and this is the encryption that was contributed via Google, right? Now, because there are lots of options that you need to turn on, I highly recommend you just use the encryption preset so you don't go wrong in turning on encryption. Now, there are not many key management solutions out there that are open source. In fact, the only one that we see today is the Amazon Key Management Server, which you'd actually have to compile yourself because it's not compiled inside the MariaDB distribution. It's only compiled if you buy MariaDB Enterprise. That may change in the future, I don't know. Also, there is a commercial product called ePre Gateway for databases, and it's probably worth looking at things like Vault, because those are also plugins one could look at. But caveats as always, if you have an encrypted binary log, MySQL binlog has no way to decrypt it. So if you have a replication problem, this could pose an issue for you. Also, if you're using MariaDB Galera Cluster, the Gcache is not encrypted. Remember, this encryption actually encrypts logs, as opposed to the MySQL version that doesn't. So in this case, the Gcache is not encrypted. An extra backup, of course, needs a little bit more work because you need to make a SSD method sometimes, and this is a problem. When it comes to password validation, MariaDB has a simple password check, which allows you to do what it says actually, which will allow a password that is, up to like say 8 characters long, ABC12345 hash. But if you want added security, you can chain load the Cracklib password check validation plugin as well, which will then reject ABC12345 hash because that's too easy for you to guess. Now, if you come from MySQL 5.6 or 5.7 world and you think, I make use of the validate password strength SQL function, which tells me if I can go from 0 to 100 in terms of the usefulness of my password, that bit of SQL actually does not work in MariaDB yet. There's also a SQL error logging plugin, which actually logs all errors that are sent to the client. You can definitely make use of this fairly easily. It's a very basic plugin, which you could even probably install in MySQL. There is an audit plugin that is also included inside of 10.1 and 10.2, which allows you to log server activity as long as the server activity is not served by the query cache. Who uses the query cache? Anybody? Okay, that's what I thought. So it'll log basically everything but things from the query cache. MariaDB has extended the audit API, so user filtering is also possible. It's worth noting that without extending the audit API, Percona's audit plugin also does user filtering now. So there are some differences there. Of course, there are so many audit plugins. So there's the MariaDB one, the Percona one, the MySQL Enterprise one, and the McAfee one. So you have a choice of audit plugins out there today. Now, in terms of auth plugins, the PAM authentication plugin has been shipped for a very long time, and the PAM authentication plugin you can combine with something like Google Authenticator on your Linux box and actually make use of Google Authenticator on your mobile phone if you wanted to, or against LDAP and so forth. There's also included a GSS API based authentication plugin, which also works with SSPI. So SSPI being Active Directory will be good to go. And what's new is ED25519, and every time I have to refer to this, I actually have to look at the numbers because I myself don't remember it. It uses the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, also used by OpenSSH. This actually only got pushed about a month ago to 10.1 because it's a plugin. And why? Because MySQL native password is basically double SHA-1, and we know SHA-1 has been known to have collisions. So this is probably a better plugin to use going forward. However, if you are using MySQL 5.6 or 5.7 and you want to use SHA-256 password plugin, this is not the same as SHA-256 password. So again, something worth noting. I heard a vibration. So provisioning a new slave is actually extremely easy now with MariaDB. Slaves are obviously crash safe, so GTID positions are now stored inside of InnoDB tables. Multi-source replication, as I said, came out in MariaDB 10.0, so long before what you see in 5.7, and all of the work was done by Tencent and Alibaba, and the same chap who gave the flashback talk, Lik Junpeng, actually integrated this. Galera Cluster is integrated inside of MariaDB 10.1 as well, so you don't have to have separate downloads. You just need to load the right set replication plugin, so to speak. There's, of course, even more granular monitoring exposed via information schema. So the difference with group replication is that group replication exposes monitoring via the performance schema, not the information schema. So MariaDB's logic is to focus more on the information schema as opposed to the performance schema, and that's worth noting. For what it's worth, up to even 10.2, Galera Cluster is not 4.0. 4.0 was promised in 10.1 even, but this is Codeship delaying things, so it may be in 10.3. And Codeship has a talk here as well this week. Optimistic parallel replication. So again, if you were in today morning's keynote, you would have seen Thomas Ulin talk about how parallel replication has improved tremendously in MySQL 8. Now, of course, we've not seen numbers with 8 DMR and MariaDB 10.2's optimistic parallel replication. However, the talk to go to is the one happening right after this, well, right after lunch and this, in this exact room. Jean-François Gagné from Booking.com is actually going to give the talk, and from what I understand, you're going to see new things because he's been playing around with 801 DMR, and he's got some nice new graphs to show you. So it's going to be a face-off with MariaDB and 801. So highly recommended to go to this talk in this room after lunch. Start transaction with consistent snapshot, byproduct of group commit, and the idea behind it is, look, we want to provision a new slave, but we want to have a full non-blocking backup, and you could just do a MySQL dump single transaction master data and get this. Now, this has been around in MariaDB for some time. This was then ported to Percona Server 5.6, and MySQL 5.7 also has this. But previous to MySQL 5.7, you would have to run flush tables with read lock if you wanted to make a backup. So that would not be a non-blocking backup that would be convenient for you. But now it is available in 5.7 as well. We're going to skip over this. Threadpool. MariaDB created an open source threadpool. It was modified from libevent to use native thread pooling libraries. So on Windows, it uses threadpool. On Linux, it uses epoll, and so forth. K-events on BSDs. And you need to turn it on. And I would say most people find the threadpool quite useful because if you have short running queries like most typical web apps, this will not have to open up one thread per connection. We'll just use a pool of threads and constantly reuse them. So there's less, less hit on CPU caches, and it's bad for locality otherwise. Of course, if you have very long running queries, the threadpool will probably hurt you. So again, this is not for analytics use cases. Threadpool, of course, in true open source fashion, got released. Percona ported it. Percona improved it as well, and it can go back to MariaDB because that's how open source works, right? Everybody makes things better. This is not how the MySQL Enterprise threadpool is, unfortunately. InnoDB, of course, has improved over time. For one, you can now have a false primary key, which I would say is useful. Otherwise, InnoDB itself creates one for you, which you can't change. Multi-threaded flush is in 5.7, but the implementation is not the same in 5.7 and MariaDB's InnoDB. 64K pages in InnoDB is also true inside of 5.7. Defragmentation, so that you don't have to optimize table with it locking. So it's an online defragmentation. Came from Facebook, backported by Dom Kakao, and it's sitting inside of MariaDB 10.1. So for the few of you that heard about WebScale, it is true that there have been some improvements that have also reached InnoDB from WebScale, and here are a list of some of them. I think one of the interesting ones for me is the idle flush %, which will actually tune the page flushing rate when the system is idle, so it actually doesn't do unnecessary flash writes that will shorten the lifespan of your flash. From Svoy, who works also at the MariaDB Foundation, he improved MariaDB to run on Power 8 in 10.1. And most importantly, that also means MariaDB now handles memory barriers. So MariaDB works well even on ARM for what it's worth. When it comes to operational ease, of course, there is the per query variables. This is now, of course, not unique to MariaDB. It's available inside of MySQL as well. But it had a very long history because it started life as a Google Summer of Code project in 2009. If you are interested, you can read about the history there. Also, statement timeouts. The syntax is now compatible with MySQL. And you can actually abort long-running queries. MySQL's implementation only kills selects, whereas the MariaDB implementation kills any queries excluding stored procedures. So a subtle difference in operational use, but basically similar functionality. There's also the enhanced kill syntax. So you don't only kill regularly, you can also kill now hard or soft, and also kill all queries from a certain username. So this is an extension of what is available inside of MySQL 5.5, available inside of MariaDB 10.2 even. Progress reporting has been around since, I'd say MariaDB 5.3 actually, which will allow you to see the progress of, say, an alter or load data in file. Now, if you want to see progress reporting in MySQL, your only option is to turn on performance schema in 5.7 and get to see it. It is not available via information schema like it is here. So fundamental differences. And a lot of what you see here is basically stuff that is only available inside. So this would be MariaDB, and this would be MySQL. And a lot of what you see in the MariaDB bit is actually available only inside of MySQL's performance schema. Huge optimizer enhancements for a while, but I think if you want to go to a talk about optimizers and histograms, I'm sure it won't be just 50 minutes of histograms. It'll be also stuff about optimizers. So highly recommend you to go to the talk by Sergey Petrunia. Also happening in this room later today. Connect Storage Engine supports things like JSON, BSON, XML. It can connect to other ODBC data sources. It's not an OLTP storage engine. It's more there existing for you to do ETL operations. So there was talk today morning also about roles, and you have roles in MariaDB as I mentioned earlier, but you can also now set default roles in 10.1 as well. Other bits. You can control the SQL query log on a session-by-session basis. GIS has improved tremendously in MariaDB 10.1 and 10.2. Now, there has not been any comprehensive write-up on GIS functionality comparing 5.7 with 10.2. And as I said, people tend not to compare release candidate versus a GA. We'll wait for both to be GA. 5.7 has been GA for a while, so comparisons for GIS will come soon. Worth noting from a compatibility standpoint, this is a URL that's quite good for you to look at. It is not complete, but it is quite good to look at. And then things have changed over time as well. For one, the temporal format, for example, the MySQL 5.6 low-level temporal format to store time, date time, and timestamp actually turns out the 5.6 version was faster than the version that MariaDB had, so it made more sense to switch to what was available in MySQL as an example. And performance schema is still disabled, and this is actually a bit of a problem because you can't turn on performance schema dynamically. So if you think you need to use it, you'll have to know from the start that you need to turn it on. As I said, a lot of features in 10.1 are from the community. A lot of features from 10.2 also from the community. MariaDB 5.7, well, MySQL 5.7, apologies, had a lot of features that MariaDB had before. And this sort of brings, you can sort of see that, parity in terms of features are there. And there could be, obviously more features inside of MySQL 5.7 as well. But I'd still say MariaDB Server is still unique because for one, Galera Cluster is integrated. Group replication and the InnoDB cluster didn't go GA much earlier. Galera has been around now for 6, 7 years, so it's more proven, I would say. The whole encryption of not just table space, but table as well as logs is fairly useful. Yes, you will see log encryption in MySQL 8, but MySQL 8 is still a developer milestone release. Similar again with optimistic parallel replication, MySQL 8 is still a DMR. Defragmentation is definitely still unique to MariaDB. It's not in the plans for MySQL 8 either. The analyze statement, also unique. Threadpool, open source, hence it's unique. It's not open source in MySQL, so the only other option for you is Percona Server. Checking against cracklib is a MariaDB-ism. SQL error logging plugin, also included again in MariaDB. Roles and regular expressions. So the regular expressions, I don't see that. PCRE regular expressions, I don't see that coming in MySQL 8 at the moment. There are no work logs for that. So this is, again, unique MariaDB-ism, including the 3 SQL functions that exist for it, so you can actually do replace of strings and so forth. Roles. Well, roles are coming in MySQL 8 as well. So there'll be less unique things, but as I said, 8.0 is still not released as GA. Many ways for you to participate. You can contribute code, write knowledge base articles, report bugs. There's a merry gang of people on #Maria on Freenode. So MariaDB does not use Slack like folk. You can also enable the feedback plugin to let MariaDB know how many people are using it, and all these stats are actually available at mariadb.org. 2 fairly good mailing lists, Discuss and Developers. You can also tweet to MariaDB Foundation or add MariaDB Foundation on Google+. Many books available, including Learning MySQL and MariaDB by O'Reilly, by Russell Dyer, so you probably could get it out there at the Expo Hall. A little bit about 10.3 or what's coming. There has been an alpha release just this month as well. Most of the focus seems to be SQL mode equals Oracle, make lots and lots of Oracle compatibility available. So if you're interested in migrating an Oracle database to MariaDB, this may be an option for you. Oracle is, of course, more than just a parser. If you've used Oracle, you probably realize that. So, but this is just an alpha release. So plenty of opportunity to provide feedback. And things like proxy protocol support, like you see in Percona Server, so that you can have HA proxy, know the nodes that are behind the server, so if you want to have high availability, this could be useful. There's an API that HA proxy provides, and I believe even MaxScale would find this useful. So in conclusion, MariaDB is GPL v2 licensed, so I think that's a huge win. The aims are, of course, still to be feature complete with MySQL, and it is up to you, the users, to make MariaDB honest and ensure it's feature compatible. But it's also meant to be loaded with extras. You want to use new things, right? So, highly recommend you to review the compatibility docs on a regular basis. The fact that enterprise features, MySQL enterprise features, are also made open source in the server is a good thing. The PAM authentication, the Active Directory stuff via Kerberos, the threadpool, the audit plugin, all of this is actually there for you to use in an open source fashion. And this is important because you don't have to go out there and buy a license. The wide distribution of MariaDB at the moment is also extremely useful. You can get it pretty much anywhere. There's actually no reason for you not to try it at the moment. A lot of people talk about compatibility, so if you really do want to see a compatibility guide, I'm actually working on one because people want comparisons between 3 servers. So sign up at features.today to find out more going forward. So with that, I've got 1 minute left. Thank you. So with that, I have less than a minute left. So I'm open to questions. And yes.
Just several quick questions, or if you could answer them quickly.
Yes.
Advantage or differences of threadpool versus InnoDB thread concurrency. Why change to
let's do one by one. Threadpool versus the InnoDB thread concurrency. Completely different, because the threadpool is up higher on the layer, that it just opens up threads for you. So it's before the SQL parser even, right? So it's just opening up threads. So it's a different scenario. You definitely want to turn the threadpool on. Next question.
Why change to Oracle InnoDB versus XDB?
So, good question. There has actually not been much discussion as to why there was a change from Oracle InnoDB from XDB. There was undocumented talk that there was not much change in XDB that would warrant a difference, but that is probably not true because Percona still develops XDB. But maybe one of the key things is that MariaDB Corporation also hired a key InnoDB developer, Marco Mochella, sometime towards the end of last year. So that could also be another reason as to why there's a change. But there's not much discussion as to why. Yes.
So in the MariaDB development.
Yes, but not very well documented. But also, to be fair, XtraDB has plenty of things like the parallel double write buffer, which I think Marco himself was only informed 2 weeks ago. So there are lots of features that XtraDB still has that is not present in InnoDB.
So it probably makes sense to revisit that, and I would hope that there would be further collaboration between Percona and the MariaDB developers to see convergence on this.
Yeah.
But
Who knows? Yes. You have another question?
Final one, per query variable sound cool. That was the first I heard of it. Can you just quick show that slide again?
Yeah, so it's not just a MariaDBism. That's also available inside of MySQL, and this is also available inside of MySQL and Percona server. It's part of MySQL 5.7.
In that example,
This example,
if the select runs over time?
it gets terminated. Yeah, so there's one caveat though. So max statement time in MySQL versus MariaDB, one follows seconds, one follows microseconds. So your numbers will have to change.
Does it work for all statement types?
Yes. But this is not a new feature in MariaDB any longer. It's available in MySQL as well. Any other questions? Yes. Who? Yes. Without running up. Yes, that's what it's about. It's meant to actually help you reclaim space by defragmenting the InnoDB table space. It's just an SQL command. It was created at Facebook. You just execute the command. It was ported by another company called Dam Kakao from Facebook's 5.6.3 to MariaDB 10.0, and MariaDB implemented it in like 10.1. And there is documentation for the defragmentation feature. Okay, thank you for listening.